Hello, and welcome to a special vlog brought to you by the Institute of Race Relations. I'm Gabriel Crouse, and today we're going to be talking about the annual budget speech. So Tito Mboweni goes into Parliament and he has to explain what the proposed money is that we're going to spend. Where is it going to go? What's it going to be for? This happens every year. The first special vlog that we brought to you was last year for the medium-term budget speech. Now, that is a strategic endeavor. There, the Minister of Finance is supposed to lay out the thinking of where we've been and where we're going to go forward. Whereas this is really much more of a technocratic process where the minister is giving a bit of a speech, but really is laying out some numbers that are going to inform a bill, which is then going to pass as a law. The budget is basically a law. And it's important that people understand that because it's being decided on, it's being legislated by our representatives. So the question that we're going to ask is this a budget or a joke? Should we laugh or should we cry? And is Parliament doing anything serious about it? That might sound like a strangely left field way of addressing what, after all, is how your and my money gets spent. But I think if you see the way that this all began, you might get a feeling of why the theatrics are important to understanding the reality. So, Alex, could you play us the introduction that Tito Mboweni enjoyed, starting with a long-standing joke coming out of of the speakers of the House about Cyril Ramaphosa's position?
To acknowledge the presence in the chamber of the Honorable the President.
It's a Freudian slip, eh? The Deputy President. No one wants to think about that. And then, as Minister Mboweni's announced, a very jolly affair.
Madam Speaker.
So there you have it. The minister arrives on the podium to tell us about where the money's going, where it's been going, and how much of it we have left. Not to the furrowed brows of concerned accounting-type politicians, but rather to the laughs and jeers of our representatives saying, there's too much money. Give us more money. Is there enough money? No, there's too much money. And before that, this funny thing, which really, if you watch parliamentary TV, which for my sins I do quite a lot, it's uncanny how often Ramaphosa is referred to as the Honorable the Deputy President. It's always followed by a laugh because it's become a kind of accidental, long-standing joke. But there is something strange about it. There's something so strange about our president having served so diligently and loyally for so many years under Jacob Zuma, and now, as of his ascension to power 3 years ago, sort of selling himself as this guy who is surprised to discover that the electricity doesn't always turn on, and there's a lot of corrupt people in cabinet, and there's been this whole state capture thing, and it's almost as if there are human beings in play here. And I think that's important to understand. And human beings have tells. Pokers call it a tell. It's when there's something that you really so badly want someone not to think about that you end up saying it, or you end up giving it away through a gesture. And every time I hear Ramaphosa referred to as the Deputy President, I think that's part of what's going on. And it's kind of sweet that they can laugh it off. And I'm laughing too, I guess, although deep down I find it much more serious. Anyway, if this introduction seemed as far from the kind of hard accounting work that you'd expect, let's see where it goes next.
These acts of human solidarity and sacrifice reflect a patriotic spirit that runs in our veins and inspires us. The president would have said, this is in our DNA. much better English, I suppose.
I don't know what he means. He was trying to say that, you know, surviving this time of difficulty without falling apart shows that we're great. But then he sort of pays a compliment to Cyril Ramaphosa, you know, saying that it's in our DNA to be resilient is more eloquent than to say it's part of what informs the basic background values of our society. And firstly, it's not better English, actually. Tito Mboweni's English was perfectly eloquent. So I wonder if there's a little bit of a backhanded jibe there, which has something to do with the fact that Ramaphosa is, if anything, even more fixated on DNA and its expression through race than Tito Mboweni. I mean, Tito Mboweni said before this speech that most white people are racist, but at least he went on to say not all. Now, this is not good enough, especially in anticipation of explaining the dire situation that we're in to citizens, black, white, Indian, and colored. But he was trying to emphasize not all, whereas Ramaphosa has spoken about white capital and the importance of breaking things down and the importance of boiling frogs, a comment that has become sort of secondhand background knowledge to everyone and yet has never been directly addressed by the president. So maybe Mboweni is kind of trying to poke fun at the fact that Cyril Ramaphosa is even more DNA fixated than Mboweni is. I'm not sure, but I'm still getting nothing about the budget. So, Alex, keep playing.
Budget revenue is projected to be 1.35 trillion rand, or 25.3% as a share of gross domestic product in 2021. This rises to 1.52 trillion rand in the outer year being 2023-24 of the medium-term expenditure framework. When we were writing these numbers, Mr. President, 1.52 trillion, I was tempted to ask one member of the House how many zeros are in a trillion, but I thought not to do that. At the same time, non-interest spending will remain steady at approximately 1.56 trillion rand over the next 3 years.
I think this is why the media loves Tito Mboweni. It's not the real policy reform that he's driving. It's the fact that he is prepared to take the mickey out of our public representatives to their face in Parliament. We have a budget that is now the highest, government expenditure is the highest percentage of GDP that it's ever been on record. Far over R1 trillion. Who knows what R1 trillion really means? MoneyWeb tried to explain it by saying that if you made a rand every second, then in a couple of weeks, you'd be a millionaire. And in several years, you'd be a billionaire. And in 42,000 years or something like that, 48,000 years, you'd be a trillionaire. It is a hard number to wrap your head around. And yet, if you're serious and you think on the margins and you use proper accounting principles, you can understand that what it boils down to is we're in very deep trouble. And Tito Mboweni, in his charming way, is willing to say that. And I think that gets him a lot of time and affection. And that's good. But the question is, what has he done with the political capital? And that's what we're going to look to next. So what has Tito Mboweni done with the credibility that is earned with his theatrics? He's trying to walk a line. He's trying to strike a balance. And one of the unfortunate things is it's hard to really tell how he struck the balance between spending and discipline from the speech itself. It's important to remember, as I've already said, that the annual budget speech is only part of the story. Every year when the budget speech comes out, the Treasury also issues the budget documents. And these are hundreds of pages, and you've got to sift through, and this is where the heart of the matter lies. These are the real numbers. And here what you can see in a little graph next to me that's about to get bigger, very good, is the net changes in growth and rates in allocations to function groups. Now, that's a fancy way of saying you look at what the previous budget was, what actual expenditure was, and now you make adjustments over the next 3 years to try and strike the balance. And if you look at this graph, it looks like there are some substantial cuts. The graph is maybe so small for you that you can't tell where those cuts are. So let me tell you. And what you're seeing there is a reduction in 120 billion rands worth of planned expenditure for learning and culture. And if you delve further into the numbers, that is mostly for education. So we've got 120 billion rand cut for education, and then an 80 billion rand cut for peace and security. In other words, the police. This is a shocking fact, somewhat obscured by the complex sense in which this is not a cut, but rather a shift from the baseline expectation, but partly obscured by the fact that it wasn't put in the speech and was put in the numbers, and that doesn't seem to be where most journalists have gone to find the truth. So if you look at Institute of Race Relations polling, if you walk out of the streets and ask the first person you come across, what would you like to see less money go towards? I can bet you what I have that they're not going to say education and police. But this is where the cuts have taken place. This to me is very irritating. I respect Tito Mboweni's bonhomie. I think it's important that he tries to use his charm to make fun of innumeracy and ill discipline in the party to which he belongs. But I would expect a man of honor, a person of honor, endowed with the responsibilities and the powers that he has, to try and find the cuts elsewhere. It's almost as if we've taken the number one priorities and put the biggest cuts in those regions, and then taking the things we'd like to see cuts around, for example, everything that holds up the ANC patronage network or the Alliance patronage network. And there we've only seen rhetoric and vague threats, but no real action. So this is one very important graph, and I encourage you to go and look up the budget documents yourself and see this, or see further analysis about this in the Daily Friend. But there's a second graph which is also very important, and that looks at the basic overall look of the government's accounts. What are its headline items? Where's the money going, and where's the money coming from? And standing out right in front there at the top in terms of expenditure, we see debt service costs. That's not paying down the debt, that's just paying the interest. And in 2017, that was 162 billion rand. In 2018, it was 180 billion. Then it climbed up to 200 billion. For this fiscal year, the revised estimate is 230 billion. That's almost $1 billion a day just in interest. And next year to 270 billion. Bear in mind that the medium-term estimates have traditionally over the last decade underestimated the severity of the issue. Moreover, if you look at the proportion that this makes up of the economy of GDP, it's climbed from 3.5% to 4.7% just in the time that Cyril Ramaphosa has been president. And it's estimated to rise to 5% next year. That means everything that everyone in this country makes all together next year, 5% of that is going, 5% of what gets taxed out of that is going, no, not what gets taxed. 5% of that, of all the stuff we make next year, is just going to go to paying interest on government debt. It's a crying shame. And And if you look at that and you think about it a little bit too hard, you might start asking yourself this question again. Is this a budget? Is this a joke? Is this something to laugh about or cry about? And what the hell is being done to ameliorate the situation? Well, so far, the biggest change seems to be to cut education and police spending compared to what it was going to be. So now that you have a slightly deeper understanding of how Treasury is going about trying to square the circle, let's look at Tito Mboweni making the biggest campaign promise, effectively, of the ANC in this era. He's talking about how things are going to look between now and 2024, when there's going to be the next national election. And just notice that he can't quite keep a straight face.
With this framework, we are on track to achieve our goal of closing the main budget primary deficits. We shall achieve a primary surplus on the main budget in 2024-25. This will be an important achievement and will coincide with the end of this sixth parliament.
See that little smile there? And whenever he speaks to this point, there's an emerging, it's almost as if he can't keep it in. Now, I don't know if that's because he thinks it would be delicious for the ANC to actually prove all its detractors wrong by running a budget surplus in 2024 as they go into an election cycle and saying, look, everyone said we couldn't do this, but we can. So give us your vote and The Economist will endorse them again. And so will Peter Bruce, and so will Business Day and Sunday Times, and they'll do fabulously. Maybe that's what's getting him smiling. But maybe what's getting him smiling is that he's looked at the same numbers that I have in greater depth and seen that they just don't add up. It just doesn't add up to running a budget surplus anywhere near 2024, especially if you look at the legacy of the Treasury in estimating South African growth to be twice as much as it actually has been pretty much every cycle for the last decade. And in a way, again, I think it's deeply human for someone to know that they're misrepresenting the facts and have that tell, kind of for their face to give away the story that their lips are trying to conceal. And it's sweet, I guess, for him to try and do that in a funny way rather than a tyrannical, dogmatic, angry way. But he tries to make a joke out of this too. And look at Parliament's response.
It's a significant commitment and improvement to the framework as compared to what we presented in October last year, and creates a sound platform for sustainable growth. I thought you would clap because it says this is a significant improvement to the framework that we presented in October last year. It creates a sound platform for sustainable growth.
I think in that moment of theatre, you see a very South African story. Someone in charge who knows that they're selling a bunch of nonsense and is used to getting away with it and is not getting away with it anymore. People are fed up with this circus and the BS, frankly. And if there's anything encouraging to take out of this, it's the fact that some of the people that are so fed up with this are in Parliament. On the other hand, you have a half of the House that's enthusiastically clapping on command. So if history ever looks back on this speech, what's the line that it is going to remember best? Honestly, I don't know. But it might very well be this.
The National Treasury will this week publish draft amendments to the Regulation 28 for public comment. The proposed amendments to Regulation 28, in case somebody misunderstands, is to make it easier for retirement funds to increase their investments in infrastructure.
So Regulation 28 is basically what oversees how pension funds are managed in the country predominantly. And we at the Institute have been warning about attempts to pilfer the pension pot for several years. We didn't cook this idea up ourselves. We read ANC policy documents. We read Umrabulo documents, which they issue every year, and which and their discussion documents that come out of their national conventions. In 2017, in December, when Ramaphosa was elected president, one of the key questions that the ANC asked was, should we amend Regulation 28? Should we prescribe, in order to prescribe assets, which means forcing people's savings into bailing out state-owned enterprises? That concerned us tremendously. And further comments by several cabinet members, but probably the most powerful would be Ibrahim Patel, have raised those concerns even further. Now, as a result of that, you've seen some pushback within the ANC and a lot of soft peddling by the ANC's economic leaders, saying, no. Exactly as Mboweni said, we don't want to force anyone to put their money into infrastructure projects. We just want to make it easier to do. It's a little bit confusing because it's already as easy as would be reasonable, which is to say, maybe there's some technicality that could be revised that would actually be good for business. On the other hand, it's possible that what regulation change to Regulation 28 is going to look like is a shift in the ratio that pension funds are allowed to invest in particular projects, so that those that are already over-invested in state-owned enterprises, particularly in Eskom, are able to double down on that. It could shift the best practice standards that they're held to when funding private-public partnerships. We don't really know, frankly, and I don't know what to expect. Maybe you can make your own mind up on this one, given the track record of this parliament and the parliaments that have preceded it, the last three, since Jacob Zuma came to power. But of course, history will tell the tale, and we look forward to seeing what exactly Mboweni has in mind when Treasury releases this discussion document. Depending on its formulation, this could be one of the key issues that South African business and South African citizens find themselves either avoiding or being forced to pay attention to by their own future best interests in the coming year. So the budget speech of 2021 started with some pranks and some jokes. The minister's allopharynx is dead, but the circus goes on. The closest thing to cuts we're seeing are in education and security. The fastest growing expenditure item is debt servicing costs. The prospect of closing the budget deficit seems, on all the available evidence, to be a pipe dream. And so it starts to make sense that the budget speech feels less like an exercise in accounting and more like a circus with our beloved Minister of Finance, Tito Mboweni, degraded from the role of a bean counter into the role of chief clown. it's a sorry state of the nation. It's a dismal state for the budget. And if there's one last good thing to say about Tito Mboweni, it's that he understands, at least by lip service, that South Africans are facing fiscally the darkest hour we've seen since the collapse of apartheid and before that 2 world wars. I give you his concluding remarks.
To the millions of South Africans who face and continue to face enormous difficulties and challenges, we ask of you to take courage, persevere, and work with us. Above all, let us heed the counsel of Archbishop Desmond Tutu to see that there is light despite all of the darkness. A prosperous future is possible for our beloved country. Gloria est consequent. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister.
Standing ovation. Ramaphosa goes in for the hello. Nothing on the other side. Ramaphosa was left hanging. He tries again. Gooms. There we go. Remember who's boss. Thank you so much for joining us. And keep the flag of liberty flying.